Jake Barber didn't just submit a novel to the Pentagon. He says he built a classification trap. Before the manuscript ever went to DOPSR, Barber claims that he divided all the information in it to 4 categories: things that he knew were classified, things that he believed were in deep black programs, things that were already public but still might be considered sensitive, and pure fiction. He sent the first 20 pages, and according to Barber, DOPSR took 6 months, and when they returned it, 7 pages had been redacted. Now, that's the trap. If they redacted classified material, then they confirmed it. If they redacted fiction, the fiction got too close to something that's real. And if they did not redact something that he believed was in a deep black program, well, that could be way worse. My name is Buddy T, and I'm a former detective. And tonight, we're not asking whether Jake Barber's novel is true. We're asking what the Pentagon may have revealed by trying to erase it. So that was the claim. A novel was submitted to the Pentagon. There was a security review, redactions. But the real story is not the book. The real story is the trap that Barber says he built around the book. In his own publicly documented words, Jake Barber described strategy like this: our intention is to put the DOD in a pickle by creating dilemmas. We're strategically taking advantage of the fact that they must respond. They don't have a choice. No poker face. Any response will provide us with some information and inverse intelligence. No poker face. Any response provides information. And that is this episode, because Barber's argument was simple. If the Pentagon redacts something, then redaction tells you the material touched some protected ground. If the Pentagon doesn't redact something that Barber believed came from a deep black program, this also tells you something. It suggests that the material was not real, or the program may be operating outside of normal oversight channels. That's why this matters. Jake Barber may not have used fiction to hide the truth. He may have used the fiction to force the government to reveal where the truth was hidden. Now, I need to slow down for a minute and establish the floor. Not the claim, but just the floor. DOPSR, that's the Defense Office of Prepublication Security Review. It's the Pentagon's formal mechanism for reviewing material before it goes public. Former CIA directors have used the process. NSA personnel use this process. Special operations veterans use this process. Anyone with access to national security information may be required to submit that material to DOPSR before it's published. When you send a manuscript to DOPSR, you're effectively saying, I have some protected information here. Please review it. And yes, the Pentagon reviews books all the time. That's part is pretty standard, nothing out of the ordinary. But what happened here is what makes the story strange. This manuscript was not originally published as Sentinels of Ether. It was submitted under the title Into Ether, and it wasn't submitted publicly under Jake Barber's name. It was submitted under a pen name, Alva Douglas. Later, a FOIA request asked DOPSR about this manuscript titled Into Ether, and the DOPSR response confirmed the review record was real. And it confirmed that the author's name was not Alva Douglas. The author's name was, in fact, Jacob Barber. Now, that's the documented floor. A real DOPSR review, a real manuscript, and a real pen name. A confirmed connection to Jacob Barber. Now, here's the next layer. Barber publicly claimed that when the first 20 pages went out and took 6 months to review, and it came back with 7 pages of redaction, he said that DOPSR told him the manuscript had been sent out to subject matter experts. Well, Barber interpreted that as special access program level review. Now, I want to be specific here. The government has not publicly confirmed Barber's interpretation of the special access program review. So I'm not asserting that That's an established fact. What I am asserting is this. Barber publicly described the trap. The DOPSR record connects the manuscript to Barber. And the redactions became important because of the way Barber says he structured the manuscript before he submitted it. 4 categories: classified information, information that he believed was commonly known inside of deep black programs that deal with UAPs, and open source information, which could trigger a security review because it was still perceived as some sort of sensitive issue. And then the 4th category, pure fiction. That's why this review matters. Not because a novel automatically proves anything, it doesn't. But because the government's response becomes part of the evidence. In a criminal investigation, you don't just listen to what the witness says. You watch what everyone else around the case does when that witness speaks. So the episode is about that response and what may have been revealed by trying to remove it. Now, I want to take you inside the story, not because the story is automatically true. This is a story that Barber says he built as a trap. It opens in the Chihuahuan Desert near Cuyame, Mexico. If you've spent any time in the crash retrieval research or looked into it, you know that name. Cuyame sits inside one of the strangest stories in UAP lore, a reported mid-air collision in 1974 with a small passenger plane, a Mexican recovery team that allegedly vanished, and U.S. forces allegedly airlifting something out of the desert. That landscape Barber chose. It's not a random desert. It's not a random border town. It's Cuyame. In the manuscript, a Tier 1 Special Operations soldier is moving through the desert at night. He believes he's helping move some refugees, women, children, people with no power, no protection, and no one watching out for them. He believes he's involved in a rescue, but it is not a rescue. At the extraction point, a second helicopter arrives. Suspended beneath that helicopter is a large metal shipping container. We commonly refer to them as Connex containers. It's not ordinary cargo. It's a container with climate control units bolted to the top of it. Now, I want to stop there because that detail is not just cinematic. It actually connects. Marine veteran Michael Herrera described something very similar in his Indonesia account. He said he went on a humanitarian mission and it became something else entirely. It was a craft, a paramilitary unit with no insignia, and vehicles moving shipping containers with HVAC units mounted on top. Herrera testified to that detail publicly. Different country, different context, and a different year, but the same kind of container. Now, I want to be careful. Matching details don't prove that this story is true. But in an investigation, matching details tells you where to slow down and take an extra look. In Barber's manuscript, the containers are not carrying equipment. They're carrying people. People the story describes as psionic assets. Individuals identified for anomalous perceptual ability. People who could be moved without paperwork, no passports, no family who could know where they went, and no system that would come looking for them. Their purpose inside the story is not to observe recovered non-human craft from the outside. The purpose is to interface with the craft through consciousness. And then the story turns. A pilot is transporting a recovered craft. Something enters his awareness, not a radio message, not a mechanical failure, something that feels present with him, inside him, external but intelligent and overwhelming. Barber has described a very similar experience that he had publicly, not as a scene from his book, but as something that actually happened to him while he was flying at night on a recovery mission where a UFO or UAP was underneath his helicopter. There was a presence, feminine, loving, but sad. While he was trying not to fly into the mountains, Barber was overcome. He said he literally was brought to tears. And that's where this manuscript goes next. A mountain, or what appears to be a mountain, a facade, a door disguised as geology. There's a hidden entrance that opens in this book here when the aircraft transmits the correct authorization. In the story, the soldiers watch helicopters fly directly into the face of a cliff and just disappear. Now, come back to the trap. 4 categories: classified, deep black, open source, pure fiction. Barber says 7 of the 20 pages came back redacted. Now, we don't know which category, which of those 4 those pages belong to, and we don't know what was removed from the manuscript. That's the entire problem with this redaction thing. But when a manuscript contains crash retrievals, human assets, consciousness, interface, hidden facilities, and a mountain that opens up, well, that manuscript triggers redaction. Think about that. The questions change. The question's no longer, is every part of this novel true? The question is, what part of it touched some protected ground? Now, I want to show you part of the story that other coverage is not fully connected, as far as I know. Not because everyone's missed it, but because this thread has been living on this channel Beyond the Map. If you have been following Beyond the Map, you already know the phrase psionic exploitation program. You've heard Jordan Jozak describe something that sounds disturbingly close to the architecture inside of the Barber manuscript. Jozak is a former United States Air Force veteran, and he claims he worked with an organization called Skywatcher as a psionic asset. He's publicly described participating in classified programs between 2005 and 2010. These programs were where human consciousness was allegedly used to interface with recovered non-human material, including craft. His words are specific. My consciousness could project into these craft and recovered materials and then access a suite of commands, including piloting. Now, that testimony exists independent of Jacob Barber, independent of this manuscript, independent of the DOPSR process. Jozak was not describing a novel. He was describing what he says is his own experience inside a program. Then there's Dan Sherman. He's a former NSA employee who published his account under his own name. Sherman claimed that he was recruited to a program called Project Preserve Destiny. He claimed the program's purpose was to train human intermediaries to interface with non-human intelligence. He claimed that he was selected because of biological characteristics identified before birth, maybe the result of a hybridization program. And again, I'm not asking you to accept the literal truth of these claims. That's just not the standard here on Beyond the Map. The standard, though, is the pattern. Barber, Jozak, Sherman, different decades, different institutional context, and maybe different forms of disclosure, but the same architecture keeps appearing. Human beings are selected, human beings are trained, and human beings are used as a bridge between ordinary human perception and something non-human. Now, we have a manuscript containing that same architecture, submitted to the Pentagon through a pre-publication security review process under an assumed pen name, and later connected through the FOIA records to Jacob Barber, and publicly described by Barber as a deliberate classification trap. Now, that's the convergence. It's not proof, but it is convergence. And that's where restraint matters. Now, I'm not saying the manuscript is true. Sentinels of the Ether may very well be mostly fiction. I'm not saying every claim from Barber, Jozak, or Sherman is true. I really don't know. But I'm saying these independent sources describe the same specific capability. And one of those sources says that he deliberately placed that architecture inside a manuscript to test how the government would respond. Then the redactions came back. In an investigation, that response matters because institutions reveal themselves in two ways: by what they say and by what they try to remove. No, the redactions don't prove the whole story, but they tell us something in the story touched protected ground. Now, that may be the most important clue we have. If Barber's framework is even partially accurate, the implications are not small. This would not be a story just about a novel. It would be a story about oversight, because the trap works if the system has a problem. If DOPSR redacts known classified information, well, that's expected. That's what the office exists to do. If DOPSR redacts open source or public material, that suggests the classification system may be treating public knowledge like a secret. Or maybe the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing in these offices. That happens more often than people think. If DOPSR redacts the pure fiction because it accidentally gets too close to the truth, then the fiction becomes the map. Not a complete map, but at least a direction. And if DOPSR does not redact something that Barber believed to be from these deep black programs, then Barber's argument becomes much darker, because the lack of a redaction may suggest that the reviewing authority doesn't know what the program is or doesn't officially control it. That's why these four categories matter. They turn every response from the government into intelligence. Redaction is intelligence. Non-redaction is intelligence. Delay is intelligence. And escalation is intelligence. And Barber publicly described this exact logic before the story became this episode. That's why I keep coming back to the same point. The manuscript may be fiction. The response was not. There is a question that I can't answer, and I want to be honest about that. We don't know exactly what was behind those black bars in the redaction. We don't know which of Barber's four categories those redacted sections actually fell into, and we don't know whether the redactions protected classified fact, operational detail, open source sensitivity, or fiction that came too close to being something real. That's the nature of these black bars in redaction. It tells you something was removed. It doesn't tell you why. A manuscript was submitted to DOPSR under a pen name. A FOIA process connected that manuscript to Jacob Barber. And Barber publicly described the manuscript as a deliberate dilemma for the Department of Defense. He claimed the first 20 pages took 6 months and came back with 7 pages redacted. He claimed that the manuscript was sent to outside subject matter experts, and the same architecture inside that manuscript appears in other independent accounts that this channel has already documented. Human beings, selected, trained, used as an interface with something non-human. Now, this doesn't prove the story, but it does give us a question worth asking. Why would a work of fiction generate this kind of response from the government? And if fiction was enough to trigger a response, what happens when someone stops writing novels and starts naming programs? I'm Buddy T. This is Beyond the Map. Now, I don't have all the answers, but I know where the questions are worth asking. Thanks for joining us.